Well, good morning, North Albany Community Church. This is Pastor Thom. This is the first day of our fast. I hope you made it through last night after dinner. Maybe you forgot before you went to bed and had an extra piece of cake or whatever it is you might eat in the evening. That's all right. We're back on track this morning. So we're going to spend this day focusing on the Lord and focusing on what He has for us. I want to just share with you out of the book of Joel, chapter 2. If you have a chance to read it today, please do. Joel chapter 2, where Joel talks about being called back, having the people being called back to the Lord. And he tells us some things about fasting in chapter 2 when Joel calls his people to a fast. Firstly, the first thing he says in chapter 2, in the first verses, he says, I'm calling all of the elders. All of the elders. So we know that fasting should begin with leadership. And so if you're a leader of any kind of a ministry in our church, or you participate in a ministry team, you're a leader. If you lead a Bible study or you lead a group of people, women, youth, men, and you're a part of that group, then you're a leader. And so Joel says it must start first with the leaders. I'm calling you elders, is what he says in that first verse. So it starts with leadership. Secondly, fasting. When we think about biblical fasting, we want to remember that it always comes from a sense of spiritual desperation. It's us calling on the Lord because we know we can't accomplish what He wants us to do on our own. It's knowing that we have the tool of the power of the Lord, but now we're going to use it. It's not a matter of just leaving it in the toolkit, but we call out to the Lord in desperation that He would be involved in what we're doing. Turn to me now is what Joel tells us that the Lord is sharing with him to share with the people. Turn to me now, Joel chapter 2, verse 12, turn to me now. And then he caps that off with, turn to me now while there is still time. So there's a sense of desperation there. That's the second thing we want to know about fasting is that there's a sense of desperation. I read this a while back and I've written it down, and this I want to share it with you. It says this, that fasting is not so much about food as it is about focus. Fasting is not so much about saying no to the body as it is saying yes to the Spirit. Fasting is not about doing without, it's about looking within. And finally, fasting is an outward response to the inward attitude and cry of the soul. Hey, this morning we get to look at the book of Joel, when you get a chance, chapter 2. The third thing he tells us about fasting, he says in Joel 2:13, Israel, their first need, like that of the prodigal son, was just to come home to the Father. And that's what the fast is. It's a calling for us to come back to God, to focus on Him, to think of nothing but being close to the Lord. All through this day, be thinking of those things. Fourthly, fasting is not about externals. It's about, Joel says in verse 13, that, don't tear your clothing in grief, he says to the Israelites. Instead, tear your hearts. In other words, it's not about what people see. Don't go around blabbing that you're on a fast. Don't wear a t-shirt that says, I'm fasting for God today. No, a fast is something that happens inside of you. It's about your relationship with God. So focus on God. Focus on what He's doing in your life. Focus on what He would have you do in ministry, in relationships. Fifthly, fasting is a response of a broken heart. When we are brokenhearted for the things that break God's heart, that's when we should be fasting. There's a lot of things going on in our culture today. It's a whole nother sermon, I suppose, but you know and I know a lot of people with broken hearts, and I'm one, for all that is going on. When you have a broken heart for the things that break God's heart, then you want to be close to Him. I know that in my life, when I felt desperate, when I felt the most in pain, I wanted to be with my friends, my family, my parents even when I was younger. When you have a broken heart for the things that breaks God's heart, then you want to be close to Him for comfort. Joel says, come with me, weeping, fasting, and mourning, because repentance is the appropriate response when you've been straying away from God. So when you have a broken heart, because you've been away, or because of things that are going on in the culture, because of things that God is showing you around our world, you've got a broken heart for the things that breaks God's heart, then you need to return to him. You need to say, look, Lord, I need to come to you. Here I am weeping. Here I am fasting. Lord, my soul is bare to you. And then lastly, fasting is a humble response to an immense responsibility. Joel calls a solemn assembly when the people are fasting. And in verse 15 of chapter 2 of Joel, he says, blow the trumpet, announce a time of fasting. And he urges everyone to get there, the elders, the children, babies. He even says to get the bride and the groom. He says, bring them all. Why? Because God's name and reputation were at stake. Chapter 2, verse 17. Joel convinces everybody to fast. I want to do that this morning. If you made it through last night, great, but today is the day. Be committed. I don't know about you, but I'm wearing my rubber band. I'm going to snap it every time I get hungry, just to remind myself that I'm doing this so that I can be closer to God. I want to have him work in my life. Every time I feel a hunger pang, I want to ask God, what is it you want of me, Lord? What direction do you want me to go, Lord? How close can I be to you, Lord? Ask those questions today. Read Joel chapter 2 and see what he says to the people about fasting. I read a story this last week about an orphanage in India. And the orphanage in India, every Friday they have a fast. And all of the kids fast. Only they don't call it a fast. They call it a feast. They feast on Jesus. Today is our day to feast on Jesus. Awfully humbling when I read the end of the story. On Friday, when they pray, one of the things they do is they pray for the church in the United States. That's humbling, my friend. Every Friday, there's orphans in India praying for you. So today, draw close to the Lord. Be in prayer. Read Joel chapter 2. Let's get to our evening time together without having taken a bite, except to feast on Jesus. Hey, I'll talk to you tomorrow morning, and we'll break fast together. Take care. I love you. Don't be a stranger.